Good evening. This is October 12th, 2020. This is the Senate District 47 Legislative Candidate Forum. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Well, good evening to those of you that are watching this town hall forum via the live feed or from a recording or Chaska Community Television on Comcast Channel 15. Welcome. We invited all 6 candidates to this evening's forum, so I am most appreciative to these 3 legislative candidates who have agreed to participate in tonight's forum. Allow me to introduce them to you at this time. Ms. Addie Miller.
Hello.
Mr. Arlen Brinkmeyer.
Good evening.
And Mr. Dan Kessler.
Evening.
I'm Denny Laufenberger, and I will serve as moderator for tonight's forum. Joining me here at the officials' table, Eric Margolis will act as timer for this event. In just a few moments, we'll begin our forum with opening statements from each of the candidates in a sequence determined earlier this month. After the opening statements, I will ask a series of questions taken from input by email from more than 24 residents of Carver County. We won't be able to ask every question that was submitted, but those of you that are watching who did submit questions, you may hear yours asked this evening. The sequence of responses for tonight's forum has been provided to the candidates ahead of time, but the questions have not. To remove any unintended partiality on the questions on my part, I'll ask the candidate who is to answer first to choose a number between 1 and 10, and that is the question that I will ask during that round. Following the questions, we'll hear closing statements from each candidate. And at the conclusion, the forum will be posted as a recording on the same website at which you are watching this live feed. Just a reminder to the candidates, you will have 1.5 minutes, that's 90 seconds, for your statements and your answers. Eric will remind you when your time is approaching the end and will give you a stop sign when your time expires. Please respect the other candidates by responding within the time allowed. So let's begin with opening statements, starting with Senate District 47 candidate, Addie Miller. You have 90 seconds, Addie.
Well, thank you, Denny, and to the Carver County Board for arranging this opportunity for us to engage with our community. My name is Addie Miller. I'm a lifelong Carver County resident, a lawyer, a horse trainer, a committee staffer at the Minnesota House of Representatives, and I'm running for the Minnesota State Senate here in District 47. I am thrilled to be here tonight, as I believe it is our duty, our most important duty as candidates and future elected officials, to appear before constituents, to be transparent and accessible. I value the lives of those present here and those in our community more than I do any vote. That's why our campaign has not been and will not be door knocking, and why I will be wearing my mask this entire evening. When asked why I'm running, I often cite my mom's healthcare story, struggles with our public education system, lack of action around the climate crisis, or the unacceptable stagnation at the current state Senate due to partisan games. But there is a bigger picture. I'm running because I want to give back to the community that raised me. I'm a daughter of Carver County, and I want to be your voice. I know I have the right education, experiences, relationships, and ability to put aside party politics and work together to make sure that we recover from this pandemic and press forward as the resilient Minnesotans we are. Carver County deserves a common sense voice in the state Senate who can bring people to the table and strive for a brighter future. I'm looking forward to the conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. Next, House District 47A candidate Arlen Brinkmeyer. You have 90 seconds, Arlen.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Denny and Eric, as well as the Carver County Board, for putting this together, as well as my fellow candidates for attending, and to everyone who is watching for actively participating and informing yourselves on local politics. An informed electorate is a requirement for a healthy democracy. My name is Arlen Brinkmeyer, and I'm running for Minnesota State House in District 47A. I started this campaign because I believe that in a representative democracy, the representatives should reflect the voters. And although I know we have some excellent legislators in St. Paul, I don't see a lot of working class people in elected office. As someone who punches a time clock and has worked 2 jobs most of my adult life, I think it's important that people who work paycheck to paycheck have a voice at the Capitol. As the son of a 5th-generation farmer near Lester Prairie, I plan to take the hard work ethic I learned picking rock and baling hay and not stopping till the work is done to the Capitol. I believe more unites us than divides us, and that if we work to solve problems with the goal in mind, we can overcome partisan politics and find solutions that make Carver County and Minnesota a better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlen. Next, we have candidate for House District 47B, Dan Kessler. Dan, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, Denny, and I really appreciate your putting this forum together. Thank you. I'm Dan Kessler. I'm a psychologist. I am a father of 4, and I'm a candidate for Minnesota State House. Our legislature has 3 medical professionals out of 134 House members. When I talk to voters, the number one concern they had, even before COVID showed up, was about healthcare and healthcare affordability. It seems not a day goes by that someone doesn't say to me in my office, I was given a prescription that I can't afford to fill, I'm cheating my meds every month, or I'm not seeing the doctor because the cost is too high, even with a job and health insurance. We live in a country and a state where 50% of people who develop cancer end up going through their entire life savings. That has to change. And it's time that healthcare professionals have a say in healthcare decisions. I'm also a former mediator. The job of a mediator is to bring together people of differing views. I am deeply concerned about the partisanship in our legislature. With so many votes being cast along party lines, that means that roughly half of voters are disenfranchised. My job as a legislator, as your representative, will be to represent you and not my party. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Now, to the questions. Dan, you will be asked the first question, and we'll go in sequence as I've provided you. So we have 10 questions, Dan. Choose a number between 1 and 10.
Let's start with number 5.
Met Council makeup and authority. Over the last several years, there has been partisan dialogue about the Metropolitan Council as a federally mandated regional planning organization which employs over 4,000 people. This discussion includes an overreach of taxing and managing authority from non-elected members serving by the authority of the governor. Here's the question, for what changes, if any, would you advocate to either the makeup or the authority that the Met Council exercises in the 7-county region? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you, Denny. It's a good question. I am very concerned that our local area and our local district have a say in local policy. I think the Met Council has done a fine job of representing the needs of the cities, but the suburban and exurban areas don't always get their voice. I would very much like to see a stronger voice for our local areas, for Chaska, Chanhassen, Victoria, Excelsior, in making the decisions that so deeply impact our area. I think I'm for that.
All right, thank you. Addie, you're the next to answer. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Please.
Okay. Over the last several years, there has been partisan dialogue about the Metropolitan Council as a federally mandated regional planning organization which employs over 4,000 people. This discussion includes an overreach of taxing and managing authority from non-elected members serving by the authority of the governor. The question, for what changes, if any, would you advocate to either the makeup or the authority that the Met Council exercises in the 7-county region? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. In my work at the Capitol, I actually work for the vice chair of the Transportation Committee, so I have had kind of a front row seat as to how the Met Council operates, and I've been impressed, not gonna lie. But there could certainly be a lot more suburban input, a lot more local government reliance, and I must say that our regionals here, our regional transportation Authority does a phenomenal job, and the state should be investing enough so that we're not encouraging competition for funding between the Met Council and our regionals, but we're fully funding everything that we need here in Carver County. So as your state senator, I will be advocating for what's right for our community and not just what's right for a metro area. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. Mr. Brinkmeyer, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No. I think-
Okay, all right.
Thank you, though. Good question. As I've talked to voters throughout the last, better part of 6-7 months, this one has not come up as a front and center issue. I would say, generally speaking, I do have an issue with unelected officials having large amounts of power. My understanding of the Met Council is it does a reasonably good job at coordinating at a high level, taking all stakeholders into account. I think I would probably have to do some more research to give a more thoughtful answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Arlen. All right, our next question leads off with, Arlen, you get to choose 1 through 10, but not 5.
We'll do 8.
Question number 8, the partisan political divide. Politics has grown increasingly divisive, and it seems to be constantly on display at the Minnesota State Capitol, the only divided legislature in the nation. Both sides of the aisle want to see Minnesota prosper. Both sides want an outcome that is good for all citizens. But the pathway to achieve that goal is different based on the left or right thinking, liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. So this is a two-part question. In what issues will you prioritize the people over partisan politics with the authority of your office? And then the second question, will you identify any policy or position where you agree with the other side of the aisle? And if so, describe it. You have 90 seconds.
As I've talked to voters over the last 6-7 months, division is a huge issue. I'd say it's the largest bipartisan issue. I would say that, well, the second part of the question, looking at my opponent's, some of his ideas, the vocational training programs where he has advocated for students being able to apprentice with grants and then being able to come out of high school right into a job, I think is a great idea. Bringing vocational training back into the high schools, I think is an excellent idea. I would always prioritize the voters and my constituents over partisan politics. I think too often we think that the only way to get to a goal is either one ideology or another ideology. Nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. I think as long as we keep the goal in mind and don't care how we solve the problem, just as long as we solve the problem in a good way, I think that should be the test of good legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Kessler, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, Danny, I think I got it. Thank you.
Right.
The first part of this, without sounding too trite, what would I prioritize of my voters or the constituents of my party? All of them. What do I agree with my opponent on? It's the provider tax. The provider tax is a 1.8%, was 2.1% tax on all medical care. The intention of the provider tax is to pay for Minnesota care, but it pays for Minnesota care by taxing people who are sick or older, who are likely to use services more. And in doing that, the idea was that providers paid it, but the reality is that tax gets passed along to the consumer. So from my perspective, that's not an ethical tax. Now, what's different here is that my opponent's party wants to do away with the provider tax without replacing it with anything which ends up doing away with Minnesota Care, leaving tens of thousands of Minnesotans without health insurance. And bad health care is way more expensive than good health care. What I'd like to do is do away with the provider tax and replace it with another source of funding, and that's going to be a challenge to figure out, but another source of funding so that we can continue Minnesota Care, which so many people rely on to get their health care needs met.
Thank you, Dan. Addie, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you, Denny.
Okay.
So to answer the first part of the question, what issues would we prioritize people over our party? All of them, all of them. Hard stop. That's exactly why I'm running for office, to get back to a place where we can collaborate and have conversation and come up with better bills. Now, two ideals that I might agree with that the Republican side will as well. One is we need to get away from these giant omnibus bills. I've been involved firsthand in legislation that's been wrapped up in an omnibus bill that has failed later on, that shouldn't have, when it has bipartisan support to pass on its own. One great example of that is the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. It's a constitutionally dedicated fund that needs to stay in its own bill, that it did not in this past session. So another example would be an Argosy University bill that I worked on in 2019. We were able to build a coalition of, I think, 62 legislators that signed on to a letter to Congress to correct a licensing issue that we had when Argosy University shut down. It's one of my favorite things to do, find something that you agree with the other side on and work at it. There is so much more that unites us than separates us. And that's the best part about running for office, is finding where we can agree, and really getting back to where we're collaborating together and building coalitions, having conversations, and creating the best bill possible for everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. The next question, question number 3, Addie, you begin it, so choose a number between 1 and 10, not 5 or 8.
Let's go 1.
Number 1. As you consider the office for which you are running, can you describe 2 or 3 attributes or skills that you possess that make you the best qualified individual for this citizen legislator role? And then secondly, if elected, how will you apply those attributes or skills to make Carver County and our state a better place for all people to live, work, build a business, raise a family, and retire comfortably? You have 90 seconds.
Great, thank you. So a couple different skills that I have that make me uniquely qualified for this position. One, I'm from here. I was raised here. I'm rooted in the values of Carver County, and I know my neighbors, my friends, and my family, and I'm excited to bring our values and our voices to the Capitol. Second is my training. I have a law degree from William Mitchell, was trained extensively in negotiation techniques, and was able to put those into practice during my time at the legislature as a staffer. And that is another a great attribute that I have, that I don't need that kind of onboarding. I can hit the ground running on day one. I know exactly how to make a bill become law, how to build coalitions, how to get a bill across the finish line. The last thing I'll say is I was raised on a farm. I was raised actually by a libertarian and a moderate conservative on a farm. So I know the value of hard work. I know what it means to show up. I know what it means to be there when people are counting on you. And I will never give up. I will never back down from any fight that we need to have. And I will always be there and be transparent for our constituents and be the best advocate I can possibly be for everyone in Carver County. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. Next, Arlen, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I've got
Okay.
it. Thank you. So, as a former Republican who lives and works, and most of my friends are conservative, I understand the concerns and the framing of how both sides see an argument, and I'm able to frame things in such a way that both sides can see value in an issue. I understand, kind of how both, at least to a certain extent, how both sides see the world. And generally speaking, we all want the same things. We just have different issues on exactly what the problem is and how to get there. I think I can bridge that gap in the legislature, as well as my background in sales, having to influence people with no, no authority. It's pure, convincing and, bringing people on board through just, strength of character and ideas. And I will bring those skills to the legislature to help bridge the partisan divide.
Thank you, Arlen. Mr. Kessler, would you like me to repeat the question?
If you would, please, thank
I
you.
would be happy to. As you consider the office for which you are running, can you describe 2 or 3 attributes or skills that you possess that make you the best qualified individual for this citizen legislator role? If elected, how will you apply these skills and attributes to make Carver County and our state a better place for all people to live, work, build a business, raise a family, and retire comfortably?
Thank you. I'm a clinical psychologist. I spent 30 years doing clinical work with people. What that means is that when someone comes into my office, I have to be able to find a way to relate to them, to connect with them, and to make sure that they feel heard and listened to, and like I'm going to work with them, not judge them in any way. I've also worked as a mediator, and the mediation work I did was with divorcing couples trying to figure out parenting time. And I'll say that if you can bring a couple together to make a good decision that's in the best interest of their kids, I'm hoping you can bring together 2 opposing parties to make a good decision that's right for Minnesota. I am also willing to, part of what I have to do is listen and be willing to consider that I'm also wrong. Following the scientific method means that you start from a position of I don't know. And you listen to all of the evidence and you make a decision based on what the evidence says. I've been doing that my whole career, and I'd like to do that at the State House.
Thank you, Dan. Our next question, the 4th question in our sequence, Arlen, this begins with you. Choose a number. I'll tell you if we have it here.
Has 3 been picked?
3?
Yes.
There we go. Each of the 87 counties in Minnesota have a desire to ensure that their county sees the taxes that are sent to the state be returned to the county in a fair manner. What will you do in the legislature to fight for and deliver tax dollars back to Carver County to support our needs? You have 90 seconds.
I will fight to make sure that every dollar that we send to St. Paul returns to Carver County. And if it doesn't, I will work to make sure that all the dollars that do return are used to provide the largest return on investment. I think too often when we talk about taxes, we talk about just the bottom line number. I think in our lives and in our businesses, we're always looking at not necessarily what does something cost, but what is the value? What is the value that it brings? The cheapest item is not always the best buy. I think we know that intrinsically in our lives, and I will fight for that at the state capitol.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I'm good, Denny.
Okay.
Thank you. As painful as it might be, paying my taxes fills me with such a sense of pride and patriotism. I'm contributing to the greater good of our society. Ramsey and Hennepin County pay a lot into the general fund, and we do as well, certainly here in Carver County. So there's going to be a lot. We're facing a $7.2 billion deficit in the next biennium. There is going to be a lot of tough discussions that we're going to have to, and decisions that we're going to have to make. We're going to have to, yes, trim the fat, so to speak, and, protect and prioritize where the most need is. And that is something that I am very confident in my ability to do. I've been at the Capitol at 3 o'clock in the morning when negotiations break down because of situations like this. And I am confident in my ability to advocate for our needs and make sure that we're supporting those who need it the most, and that we're setting up our economy for a successful recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. Mr. Kessler, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you.
All right.
When it comes to tax dollars, you're absolutely right. Different counties pay in different amounts, and they get back different amounts. The purpose of our tax dollars is not just to support Carver County, because Carver County isn't an island. Carver County exists in the state of Minnesota and in the United States of America. We pay into taxes, and there are some things that we need. There are some elements that it's important we fight for. Proper transportation in this area that's suffering, making sure our roads are solid and stable. But there are other things that benefit the entire state of Minnesota that also benefit Carver County. A strong, booming economy for the state of Minnesota benefits Carver County. Strong schools statewide benefit Carver County. A strong environment benefits Carver County. So we don't pay $1 out and get $1 back. We pay $1 out. We get the needs of Carver County met, but we also get a thriving economy statewide, and that's what builds us here, because we're part of Minnesota and we're part of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, the fifth question, Addie, this is your choice. 2, 4, 6, 7, 9, 10.
Let's go with 2, please.
Transportation infrastructure. In Carver County, as everywhere in Minnesota, transportation infrastructure is vital to commerce, education, connecting our resources, people, goods, and services to our surrounding region. While the county has done reasonably well to maintain county roads, the federal and state seem to be behind in funding their responsibilities. What will you do to fund and move forward projects in the county like Highway 212, Highway 5, and key bridges that need repair? You have 90 seconds.
Absolutely. You know, I think anyone who's lived here long enough knows someone who has been in an accident on Highway 5 or 41 or 212. And we've all been frustrated by the kind of never-ending construction there. So it is a priority of mine to secure that funding to complete those projects, complete the necessary safety improvements and the expansions, just to keep us moving and safe. You know, the other week I talked with both Kathy from Chaska and Ben from Watertown. Ben works in Minneapolis and expressed frustration that he didn't have the option with his current schedule to take public transportation into Minneapolis. And Kathy from Chaska moves around Carver County dependent on that public transportation. Both, you know, express similar frustrations with the scheduling. So not only am I going to prioritize infrastructure funding, but public transit as well. And like I mentioned earlier, we have a phenomenal regional partner here that should be funded and encouraged to partner with the Met Council rather than compete for funding. And I think any infrastructure conversation would be, I'd be remiss to not mention that we also need water treatment facility, funding for healthier communities, and statewide broadband so we can continue to thrive in a digitally connected world. That is something that I will not let go neglected, and I will prioritize when I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. Mr. Kessler, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Happy to. In Carver County, as everywhere in Minnesota, transportation infrastructure is vital to commerce, education, and connecting our resources, people, goods, and services to our surrounding region. While the county has done reasonably well to maintain county roads, the federal and state seem to be behind in funding their responsibilities. What will you do to fund and move forward projects in the county like Highway 212, Highway 5, and key bridges that need repair? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, first, as you mentioned, these three areas, 41, Highway 5, 212, they're in desperate need of upgrade. This is the fastest growing county in the state, and the roads to this county and in this county have not kept up with that. Part of what has to happen is we need to pass a bonding bill. This is supposed to be a bonding year. Now, COVID-19 interfered with legislature and the workings of legislature, but we have had 4 special sessions, and we're now in the 5th special session. Lots and lots of opportunities to take up a bonding bill. It didn't happen. It didn't happen each of the months it could have happened. I don't know if it's going to happen this time. The importance of a bonding bill isn't just to improve transportation. It also puts people back to work. Our economy is suffering. We have high unemployment right now because of COVID, and we need to move forward with putting people back to work so they're paying into our tax base to create a stronger economy for our state. I want to talk a little about public transportation. Looks like I'm out of time. My apologies.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Brinkmeyer, Arlen, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. So as somebody who has almost an hour commute to work every day, sometimes 6 days a week, I know the need for good roads, good transportation. To Dan's point, definitely working across the aisle to get a bonding bill passed so that we can build infrastructure, roads, bridges, expansion, clean water, rural broadband. All this is extremely important now more so than ever with COVID. For every dollar spent on infrastructure, it's a money multiplier. Going back to that ROI and that value, there's almost no better way to grow an economy than to spend dollars on infrastructure spending, besides maybe education. So yes, working across the aisle to get a bonding bill passed to prioritize upgrading our roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlen. All right, we're halfway through our questions. Take a deep breath, candidates. The sixth question begins with you, Mr. Kessler. Choose a number, 4, 6, 7, 9, 10.
We'll go with 7.
Healthcare and COVID. This COVID era has brought health issues, cost of healthcare, prescriptions, preparedness for emergency situations, and such into the spotlight. What healthcare positions and policies will you advocate for in the legislature, and how will your advocacy of these policies help the people of Carver County? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Minnesota has some of the best doctors, healthcare systems in the country. The problem is that some people can't afford this, even with jobs, even with insurance. I met a fellow, his name is Scott. He called me up after I decided to run for office, and we sat down in Caribou, back when you could sit down in Caribou. He has a master's degree in finance. He's a type 1 diabetic with an autoimmune disorder. He misses too many days of work because of illness to hold a job. And I used to testify for disability and Social Security, and if you miss 2 or more days a month, you're probably not going to be able to hold a job. But he has a really strong work ethic, and he wants to work. So he does people's taxes. He did mine this year. Did a great job. He drives Uber and Lyft when he can, when he's feeling better. He makes about $35,000 a year. This means that he's not eligible for Medicaid, and he's not eligible for Minnesota Care. So his total medical bill every year is over $10,000 between premiums, deductibles, and insulin, which is way too high. That's more than a third of his income when post-tax. That has to change. We must make sure that we have a system where everyone can afford their health care. Because again, getting health care is less expensive than not getting health care. Good health care is cheaper than bad health care.
Thank you. Arlen, you're up next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay. This COVID era has brought health issues, cost of health care and prescriptions, preparedness for emergency situations and such into the spotlight. What health care positions and policies will you advocate for in the legislature, and how will your advocacy of these policies help the people of Carver County? 90 seconds.
First of all, I think the unfortunate reality is the true fix to this can't be done at the state level. It has to be done at the national level. But on the state level, we can make some changes and make things better. I think what COVID has shown is that tying healthcare to work doesn't make sense. Too many people in losing their jobs have lost their healthcare when they need it most. I know one of my family members they have an autoimmune disease. And they did everything right. They found insurance that covers the drug that makes their life livable, and paid the extra for that insurance policy. And then that insurance company decided they weren't going to cover that drug anymore. And so now that's an extra $15,000 out of pocket in a year, when that's maybe half of what that person makes in a year. The cost of prescription drugs, the cost of insurance has just skyrocketed. And I think one of the things we can do is, like the insulin law, mitigate price gouging, making it illegal, and then surprise billing. Working on, I think anybody who has insurance knows that they go to the doctor and they're expecting a $500 bill and it's a $2,500 bill.
Thank you, Arlen. Addie, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. I'm glad to get this question. I got into politics because of healthcare. My mom suffers from 2 autoimmune disorders, and her every 3-month bill is about $20,000 before insurance. And we're blessed that she is still with us and able to be healthy. But not everyone here in Carver County or in Minnesota is that lucky. Everyone deserves access to quality health care that does not depend on how much money you make or what job you have. No one in our community should have to weigh the options between buying groceries for their family and getting the care that they need. The Minnesota Care program had bipartisan support and has had bipartisan support since its inception. So we should be expanding that program and allowing everyone in Minnesota the option to pay and to purchase their plan through the Minnesota Care. Rationing life-saving medications like insulin should be a tragic thing of our past. And we should be able to know what kind of costs to expect when we go to the doctor or pick up a prescription. So I will, at the Capitol, always be pushing for more transparency from our care providers, holding Big Pharma accountable, continuing to drive prices down. And I do want to also advocate for mental health services to be covered under all health insurance plans in Minnesota, and expand our mental health services into rural areas, schools, police forces. And I am committed to working with everyone in the Minnesota legislature to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. Our next question begins with Mr. Brinkmeyer. Arlen, choose a number, 4, 6, 9, or 10.
Go 9.
Law enforcement, policing. I received several questions in the category of law enforcement, policing, impact of violent protests versus peaceful assemblies, defunding police, protecting our citizens' safety. So here's the question. What message would you take to the legislature about the safety of your constituents, and for what changes in law or policy would you advocate on behalf of Carver County and the state of Minnesota? You have 90 seconds, Arlen.
So I would say that, generally speaking, I think the people that are calling for reform generally just want to be policed like we are in Carver County. I think that we do a good job investing in all the things that make a community safe: education, schools, access to mental health, healthcare. All those things could be better, but we do a better job than a lot of places. And those things, drive down crime. And when you have less crime, you have less, you don't have an occupying force for police. We, in Carver County, you generally see your police when you need to. And I know the Carver County Sheriff has already invested in, rather than hiring another officer, they hired I believe a social worker or a psychologist. So they're already being proactive in implementing some of the things that we're talking about when we talk about police reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, Addie, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. Got it. Let me be very clear. I do not support defunding the police. Now, that might be a convenient talking point for some people, but that is not a serious conversation we are having about our community here in Carver County. No matter what you look like or where you come from, Every Minnesotan deserves to return to their family safely at the end of the day. I've had conversations with law enforcement, many of which who are supporting my campaign, about investing in supports that would share the burden that law enforcement faces, whether that be a sexual assault victim advocacy, a crisis counselor on dispatch, a homelessness advocate. The reason that I went to law school in the first place is because I believe in holding people who break the law accountable, and that includes law enforcement and citizens. The goal should be to reduce crime, and we do that by investing in things like public education, healthcare, affordable housing, a livable wage. And I'm committed to partnering with law enforcement and local community groups to make sure that Carver County is a place where everyone feels safe, no exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. Mr. Kessler, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you.
All right.
I think Minneapolis and many people in Minneapolis would love to have the relationship with their police that we have here in Chaska. After the incidents over the summer, our local police force held a number of listening sessions, both online and in person, giving people the chance to share their concerns about policing. I attended one of those, talked to the police chief, and was pleased to hear the willingness to listen to people and have an open dialogue and conversation. That's what we need more of. The other piece I'm most concerned with, I'm a psychologist, I mentioned this, I've been doing this for 25 or 30 years. Dealing with a suicidal person, an agitated, mentally ill person, is hard for me after 25 years. And we ask our police to do too much. We ask our police to go into situations with people who are suicidal or threatening to harm themselves or other people. We need to handle those situations the way they handle them at our hospital. We have our security force there, but the mental health professional takes point. We call in the security or the police if necessary, and it's almost never necessary. If we ask our police to do policing and move the social work off their plates, that's going to create a much more robust relationship and I think a better policing system.
Thank you, Dan. Our next question begins with Addie Miller. Choose a number, 4, 6, 10.
So 6.
Governor's emergency powers. Minnesota has a part-time citizen legislature. The coronavirus pandemic, along with multiple emergency special sessions, each prompted when the governor extended the state's peacetime emergency by 30 days, have challenged our governing institution, which is not designed to be a full-time legislative body. Currently, by a majority vote of each house of the legislature may terminate a peacetime emergency extending beyond 30 days. Here's the question. What changes would you support to address the way in which the governor's emergency powers are both declared and extended? You have 90 seconds.
Well, we're in a very unique situation here, unprecedented times. I'm sure we're all getting sick of saying that, but it's a very rare thing when 49 states and the president agree on something, and they all agree that we are in a peacetime emergency right now in one form or another. Having that peacetime emergency means that the governor is able to move swiftly, and that's something the legislature cannot do as a deliberative body, as we saw with how long it took for the insulin bill to pass, despite having bipartisan support. It also means that we have protections in place currently for first responders, healthcare workers, farmers, telemedicine, the ability to purchase and distribute PPE, and we're avoiding mass evictions, which is potentially going to lead to a homelessness crisis. The governor, I can say from experience, working at the legislature, is not working unilaterally. There's constant communication. There's constant input from legislators and from staff. I've been involved with it myself. You just have to show up. You just have to agree and collaborate and continue to work together. When we have those protections in place to cover the consequences of lifting that peacetime emergency, and we get down to a lower number of cases per day, that's when I would vote to remove the peacetime emergency and the executive orders. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Mr. Kessler, Dan, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you.
All right.
There are really two roles of legislature in dealing with COVID. The first, as you mentioned, is to provide a check on the governor's executive powers. They have the opportunity to do that. In all 5 special sessions at this point, the governor's powers have been upheld, along with 48 other states. The only state where the governor's powers have not been upheld is Wisconsin, and that was done by the judiciary. The second role of legislature in dealing with COVID is recovery. Recovery efforts are absolutely critical. Our economy was booming. It's not now. We have to bring it back, and that's going to take strong legislature. It's going to take people who are able to come to some agreement about how to move forward. Now, think about, for a moment, what happens if you take away the executive authority from the governor and put it in legislature. Everyone in legislature agreed that we needed to do something about the price of insulin, and it took 3 years to get that done. We have wide disagreement in legislature about how to handle COVID. What we would get is complete disarray and a total blockage of anything ever happening. So these are troubled times. They call for strong leadership from the governor, and our recovery efforts are going to take strong leadership from legislature.
Thank you, Dan. Next, Arlen. Mr. Brinkmeyer, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay. Minnesota has a part-time citizen legislature. The coronavirus pandemic, along with multiple emergency special sessions, each prompted when the governor extended the state's peacetime emergency by 30 days, have challenged our governing institution, which is not designed to be a full-time legislative body. Currently, by a majority vote of each house of the legislature may terminate a peacetime emergency extending beyond 30 days. What changes would you support to address the way in which the governor's emergency powers are both declared and extended? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, in looking at the emergency order, there was roughly about 70 things that it allowed the governor to do in lieu of the legislature. They gave him the power to do these things. And it's all very, I think if anybody took that point by point, I would say the majority of everybody would agree that these are things that leadership needs to act swiftly when there is an emergency. And like my associates have said, 49 states agree that we are in a state of emergency. So I think that in talking to a lot of voters, they have thought that the emergency order gave the governor basically unlimited power to do whatever they wanted. That's not the case. I think the 70 points make sense, and the legislature has upheld that. I think if at some point we do get to a point where we are no longer in emergency, cases are declining, there's a vaccine, maybe something else I can't think of happens, possibly we could vote for the emergency to end. But until then, I think the emergency powers make sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlen. Okay, our ninth question. Mr. Kessler, you begin, and you were the final one with a choice, 4 or 10.
Let's go 10.
10. Minnesota Budget Office released the May 2020 interim budget projection showing that Minnesota's budget and economic outlook has significantly worsened since the coronavirus pandemic. A deficit of $2.4 billion is projected for the current biennium, which is almost a $4 billion change compared to the February forecast. In addition, Minnesota faces a projected $4.7 billion deficit in the 2022-23 biennium. Here's the question. If elected to the legislature, how will you prioritize addressing the budget deficit and balancing policy making versus deficit spending in the coming years? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. One of the problems here is that we have projections, but we don't yet know how bad the budget shortfall is going to be. We know it's going to be bad. When we went into this year, one of the big arguments was how are we going to use our surplus? We had $2 billion surplus. And there was an argument here. The argument was, do we invest this, save it for a future disaster or rainy day fund, or do we give it back to people in the form of a tax cut? We never got to make that decision. Our legislature didn't have a chance to make that decision because the disaster showed up. And I'm so thankful that they didn't get a chance to make that decision, because had we gone ahead with giving that money away, we would have ended up in a much worse space than we are now. We are going to have to make, the legislature is going to have to make incredibly difficult decisions in the coming years. The budget shortfall is not going to go away. We're going to have to invest in the economy, in building jobs, in bringing back the tax base and bringing our economy back from the brink where it is now to the thriving place it was just 9 months ago.
Thank you, Dan. Arlen, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I've got it. So yes, I think when we look at how we put together a budget, at least for a household, I know everybody, if you can, you squirrel away money for a rainy day. And thank goodness that the state of Minnesota squirreled away money for a rainy day, because in February, March, it started raining. And now we're still going to have a lot of heartburn in the coming budget, but it's going to be better than it would have been. So lawmakers are going to have to get together in a bipartisan way, in a very thoughtful way, and figure out, what do we cut? Where is there some fat we can trim? And then how do we reinvigorate this economy? I think if we can pass a bonding bill and get infrastructure jobs, that will go a long way to a balanced or a surplus again in the budget and getting the economy moving again. But yes, it's going to take a lot of bipartisan, thoughtful working together to figure out how to get the budget straightened out in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. So the coronavirus has changed our way of life. And certainly we are facing a huge deficit in the next biennium, but we have an opportunity here to come back better than we were before. This has changed the way that we can advocate for ourselves within our current system. The very best thing we can do to get our economy back on track and get kids back in school is to get the virus under control. We do that by listening to the experts, by listening to science, not muddying the waters with partisan games, arbitrarily firing commissioners, holding up a bonding bill. So the very first thing we should do is pass a bonding bill. The current legislature has failed to do that 5 times, and potentially 6 if they can't get it done on Wednesday. We're leaving thousands of well-paying jobs on the table without that bill, and we should have passed that immediately. Next, we should be offering low or no interest loans to small businesses and farmers to get them back on track so we don't have more of them having to shut their doors. We should be looking at new creations of revenue, whether that be legalizing recreational marijuana and taxing it, sports betting and taxing it, being creative in how we're bringing in money. And we're going to need to make some tough decisions in cuts. As long as we're prioritizing what's important, healthcare, education, working families, we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this together, and we are capable of doing that. And I'm excited to advocate for us in that conversation.
Thank you. We're to our last question, and this will be the sequence in answering. We'll begin with Ms. Miller, then Mr. Kessler, then Mr. Brinkmeyer. So this is the last question. Addie, for you. During the past few months, we have heard an increasing call from all segments of our society that decades and centuries of systemic racism and social injustice must end. What role does the state legislature have in addressing the issues of racial and ethnic disparity in law enforcement, housing, employment, education, and other areas that contribute to quality of life? And then secondly, what is your personal role in this action? You have 90 seconds.
we need to address the underlying issues, things like poverty, homelessness, access to healthcare, education. We do that not by ignoring the problem, but by acknowledging it, acknowledging that systemic racism does exist, and we need to tackle it head on. We do that by standing with our Black and brown neighbors, and we do that by being actively anti-racist. It's up to the elected officials to facilitate conversations. I personally, as a white woman, don't believe that it's my role, that it's appropriate for me to come in and say, I know all the answers and here's how we fix it. But it is my job to use my privilege and my position to elevate the voices that have been leading on these issues for decades. And one thing I learned from working with the Posse Caucus, the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus at the state legislature, is that you can look at all kinds of legislation through an equity lens. Great example of that is to require a bill that Representative Herr carried to require a demographic analysis in addition to any environmental impact study done by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So we can be creative and looking at an equity lens. And last, it's very important as elected officials, it is our responsibility to put out correct information. Nothing harmful, nothing divisive, but things that are helpful, anti-racist, and stand with our allies and our Black and brown neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Mr. Kessler, you're next. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you.
All right.
I am white. My sister is Black. My kids, 3 out of 4 of them are white. My sister's kids are Black. A few years ago, when my oldest boy was in high school, I got a call from the Chaska police. Are you Ethan's father? Yes. What did he do? Was my response. Had my sister received the same call, she would not have had the same response. With a Black son of the same age, she would have responded with fear. Is he alive? What happened to him? It is the job of all of us, especially those who serve as representatives or community leaders of any kind, to speak out against racism wherever we see it. Systemic changes have to happen. We need equity in our schools and equity programs. We need education. We need access to health care for everyone, because we know from COVID that access to health care makes a difference, and Black and brown people get sicker and die more often from COVID because of access to health care, issues of housing. We have to fully fund our schools across the board so that all school systems are treated equally and all students get equal education regardless of where they live. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Meyer, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
During the past few months, we have heard an increasing call from all segments of our society that decades and centuries of systemic racism and social injustice must end. What role does the state legislature have in addressing the issues of racial and ethnic disparity in law enforcement, housing, employment, education, and other areas that contribute to quality of life? And what is your personal role in this action?
I think as leaders, it's not enough just to not be racist. We have to be actively anti-racist. I think that for too long, we have kind of pushed underneath the rug that in, liberal Minnesota, that minority communities have some of the worst outcomes in the nation. We need to invest in communities like we do in our suburbs. We need to invest in education. We need to reform our broken prison and justice system that disproportionately incarcerates minority men. We need to stop the war on drugs, the failed war on drugs that disproportionately affects those communities. It takes fathers out of the house, away from families. there's a myriad of social ills that that we can change by changing the socioeconomic situation of those communities. And I think we need to do a lot to change that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've gotten through 10 questions. Now we're to our closing statements, and we'll begin with a candidate for 47A House District, Arlen Brinkmeyer. You're first. You have 90 seconds for your closing statement.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone tonight at home for watching. I'm not a politician. I am merely a concerned citizen. This is all, frankly, kind of new to me. But I'm running to be a state representative because I truly believe that the most important position in democracy is an engaged, involved, and informed citizen voter. And win or lose, I will keep fighting for the things I believe in for the people of Carver County, to make the home that me and my wife have chosen a better place for everyone. I encourage all of you to join me in getting involved in your local schools, attending school board meetings, showing up at city council meetings, calling and writing your elected officials, holding them, hopefully holding me, accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlen. Next, candidate for 47B House District, Dan Kessler.
Thank you, Denny, and really thank you for putting this together and making this happen tonight. I can't believe I'm going to say this now, given how I felt when we started, but I really wish we could go on longer because there's so many areas to discuss that we didn't get a chance to, and I'm going to refrain from trying to run through them in my 90 seconds. I also want to thank everyone watching, and quite frankly, I want to thank my opponent for his service. I know that serving the legislature is a challenge, and a challenge I'm looking forward to. My colleague to the north, Dr. Kelly Morrison, one of the other healthcare professionals in legislature, likes to talk about evidence-based legislation. What that means is legislative decisions are made based on what the evidence says is going to work best. That's the kind of work I want to do as your state representative. I want to look at the data, not walk into the room saying, what does my party want? And I really believe that that's the kind of representation everybody needs. Our state needs, our local areas and communities need. A legislator who's going to say, what's the best choice? What does the evidence say? Not what does my party say? That's what I will do as your representative. I ask for your vote on November 3rd, or when you choose to vote, if you choose to vote early. Whichever way you feel most comfortable, vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Next, Addie Miller, candidate for Senate District 47.
Thank you, Denny, Eric, and the board for hosting this candidate forum this evening. I can only say that I am so very disappointed that the voters do not get to see the candidates side by side and make the most informed decision. But I am so grateful for the opportunity to show up here and share my views with you tonight. Carver County, I believe that you have a very clear choice here. I'm a farm kid, a law school grad, a committee staffer. I know that you work hard for what's important. That's why our campaign has worked tirelessly day after day, making over 30,000 calls so far for over a year. Because this race is important, because the future of our district is important. And the overwhelming support we've received from people on all sides of the political aisle has demonstrated that Carver County is taking a stand against hatred and scare tactics, and a stand for hope, optimism, and common sense. We know that fear-mongering politics, political dynasties, dirty campaigns, shallow policy discussions, and hollow promises do not work for us. I know that we are tired of seeing those partisan games get in the way of making life better for all of us here. I'm here to give back to the community that raised me. I am rooted in our values, and I'm looking forward to bringing your voice to the Capitol. I have the right experience, relationships, education, and drive to be an effective advocate for you in the Minnesota State Senate. As a daughter of Carver County, I ask for your vote on or before November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. And thank you to each of our candidates this evening, and not only for being here, but also for your willingness to step into the arena of public service. This is a noble goal, and I wish each of you the best of luck the rest of the way for the next 20 days or so. Also want to say thank you to Eric Margolis for his help this evening in not only coordinating this forum, but also acting as our timekeeper. And thank you to the Carver County Administration, especially Nick Coctavi, for accommodating this event at this location under these circumstances. And most importantly, thanks to you, the viewing audience, who chose to watch and learn from this forum. We hope that this event has helped you as you prepare to vote for State Senate and House District 47, 47A, and 47B candidates this fall. Remember, early voting is already underway in Carver County. Visit the Carver County website for instruction on early voting and absentee voting and voting on Election Day, November 3rd. And please, exercise your privilege and your right to vote. Thank you, and good evening.